Stitching you fools up.
Jackass? You gotta stitch up him. Put that gun away.
Capitan. 3, I'm only a medic on the side, so don't get shot when it's fucked off. Okay. Sir?
Albie, what's she? You're selling morphine on the internet, right? You do, asshole.
Didn't do anything. On my fucking papers, boss.
If you got him?
You got your fools leave too.
I just proved out.
You're all coming. Vacation. The colonel said okay. Captain's gonna be my best man.
¿Qué pasó? ¿Está todo bien?
No podemos hablar más en español. You're talking to an American.
¿Está linda? Sí.
Las magnolias marchitas, porque no está.
Welcome to the Film Box, and today we are opening something that surprised me more than I expected it to. There is a specific kind of action film that almost never gets talked about the right way. Not the blockbusters with 9-figure budgets, not the prestige war epics nominated for awards. I am talking about the kind of film that quietly drops on a Friday with almost no fanfare, lands on your streaming queue looking like one thing, and then turns out to be something else entirely. something with a real pulse underneath the gunfire. Brothers Under Fire is that kind of film, and I think it deserves a proper opening, so pull up a seat. We are going in layer by layer the way we always do here, because every film is a box, and this one? It has more inside it than the packaging suggests. Now, before we go anywhere near the story itself, let me tell you the single most interesting thing about this film. Not what happens, not who wins or who dies. The most interesting thing is the question the whole movie is quietly built around, one that most people walking in will completely miss. What does it actually cost the soldier to care? Not to fight, not to follow orders, to genuinely personally care about people who are never part of the mission. That question drives every decision Captain Jordan Wright makes from the first frame to the last, and by the time this film ends, you will have an answer. Whether you like that answer or not is a very different matter, but that question is the real engine here. Keep it in mind, we will come back to it. Let me open the lens now and give you a look at how this film was actually made, because knowing what went into the box changes how you see what came out of it. The first thing worth knowing is that this film began its life under a completely different identity. For well over a year, it was known as Sierra Madre, a title that carries its own weight of meaning. Mountains, hardship, something ancient and immovable. According to reporting at the time, the project was first announced at the Cannes Film Market in May 2024, where Kiefer Sutherland's attachment to the lead role was revealed. That announcement alone changed the temperature around the project immediately, because Sutherland is not a name people associate with forgettable filler. He is someone who, even in genre work, tends to bring a gravitational seriousness to whatever he is doing. The film's title was quietly updated to Brothers Under Fire in March of 2026, just weeks before its release date. That shift, from the poetic geographical resonance of Sierra Madre to the more direct militarized Brotherhood Under Fire, tells you something about how the finished film positions itself. It is less interested in metaphor than in connection, less about the landscape than the people trapped inside it. The second production detail that will genuinely change how you read a key visual choice. Production on the film began in Colombia in November of 2024, according to coverage from that time. The film is set in Mexico, but it was made in Colombia, and here is why that matters when you are actually watching it. The Colombian landscape carries a visual weight and texture that a studio backlot or a greener Mexican region simply would not replicate. When you see those tight village streets, those dense surrounding hills, that particular quality of golden and amber light pressing through dusty air, that is real. It is not manufactured. The geography is not pretending, and the effect on the story is subtle but real. The soldiers and the cartel are not the only powerful presences in this film. The land itself feels like a third force, indifferent and unmoving while everything around it burns. The third thing we're carrying in with you is the director Justin Chadwick's track record and what it tells you about his intentions here. Chadwick is a filmmaker with a genuinely unusual range. He made Mandela, Long Walk to Freedom, a film of enormous biographical weight and moral scope. He also made the period drama Tulip Fever, which was received more critically. What links them is Chadwick's instinct for using physical location as emotional architecture. He does not shoot a space, he builds a feeling inside it. Coming to a lean action survival story with that kind of background means something. He reportedly approached Brothers Under Fire not as a pure action machine, but as a film about men who have been taught to process everything through protocol, and what happens when the protocol cannot reach fire now. That is a character thesis, and it gives the action sequences a different texture than you would get from a director whose only interest is kinetic spectacle. Fourth, the casting choices around Kiefer Sutherland deserve their own moment because the ensemble assembled here is not window dressing. Ashton Sanders, who you may remember from Moonlight, one of the most critically acclaimed films of the last decade, is in this cast as Carson. That is a deliberate choice, not a coincidence. Putting someone with Sanders's dramatic pedigree into a survival action film signals a specific intention. The filmmakers wanted emotional truth in the quieter beats, not just trained bodies who could run toward camera during a shootout. Laura Osma, a Colombian actress, was cast as Isabella, and that casting choice grounds the story in something the American military characters cannot fully access. She represents the civilian world that has to live with the consequences of both the cartel's violence and the soldiers' intervention long after the dust settles. Omar Chaparro as the cartel boss Baker brings a very specific quality to the antagonist. Not the operatic villain of a big budget franchise, but something more grounded and perhaps more genuinely unsettling. And Tommy Martinez playing the ill-fated groom Alberto, the entire emotional reason the story happens at all, was reportedly cast for a quality the director described as warmth under pressure. His character is present in the film only briefly before the inciting tragedy, but reportedly the filmmakers went to great lengths to make sure that brief presence mattered. Because if you do not feel Alberto's death, nothing that follows carries the weight it needs to carry. Fifth, and this is the detail I find genuinely fascinating from a crafting perspective, the screenplay was written by Delbert Hancock and Ian Mackenzie Jeffers. Jeffers is perhaps best known for writing The Grey, the Liam Neeson survival film that was ostensibly about wolves, but was really about men staring down mortality. There is a through line in that work that connects directly to Brothers Under Fire. Both films are structured around a group of men stranded in hostile territory, facing a force that cannot be reasoned with. But more than the surface plot, both films are interested in a specific psychological space, the place a man goes when the rules he has lived by stop being enough. Jeffers knows that territory, and once you know he have built his script, certain scenes land differently. The moments of stillness amid the chaos, the quiet exchanges between Wright and his men, they are not filler between the action, they are the film's actual argument. Now, with all of that unpacked, let us open the box properly. Brothers Under Fire is a 2026 American action film. It runs just over 100 minutes. It was directed by Justin Chadwick and written by Delbert Hancock and Ian Mackenzie Jeffers. The film stars Kiefer Sutherland as Captain Jordan Wright, with a supporting cast that includes Ashton Sanders, Tommy Martinez, Laura Osma, Omar Chaparro, Solly McLeod, Lerda Keogh, and several compelling Colombian actors in key roles. It was distributed by Vertical Entertainment and received a simultaneous limited theatrical release and digital premiere on April 17, 2026. The cinematography was handled by Toby Elwes and the film was edited by Joshua Chadwick. At its heart, this is a story about what happens when the only family a soldier has left gets caught in the crossfire of a war he did not start. It is a military survival film, yes, but underneath the tactical maneuvering and the firefights, it is asking something quietly devastating. At what point does protecting the people you love become indistinguishable from simply refusing to let them go? And now, should you watch it, the spoiler-free version right here. If you like your action films to have a real human center underneath the gunfire, if you appreciate a lead performance that earned your investment rather than simply demanding it, and if you are willing to let a film take a minute to breathe before it ignites, then yes, absolutely. Watch it. It is not a perfect film. I will be honest about where it stumbles, but it is a real film. It has something to say and a genuine commitment to saying it. My personal rating on Brothers Under Fire sits at a solid 7.3 out of 10. That is a genuine, considered number, not a generous rounding up and not a dismissive shrug. It is a good film that occasionally could have been a great one, and understanding where that gap lies is part of why we are here. Now let me tell you how it felt to actually sit down and watch this. I will be honest with you about my expectations going in because they were complicated. The trailer for Brothers Under Fire was the kind of thing that made me cautious. Military action, cartel villains, a charismatic older male lead doing the stoic stare into the middle distance. On the surface, it could have been assembled from a checklist. I have seen enough of those films to know that surface familiarity can kill a viewing experience before it has even begun. The danger with any genre film is that you stop seeing it and start predicting it. So I made a deliberate choice to go in as open as I could manage. the opening minutes of the film do something I did not anticipate. They do not give you war, they give you celebration. The film opens in Syria, a efficient establishment of who Captain Jordan Wright is and what world he inhabits. The desert light, the operational intensity, the barely spoken bond between men who have been through things together that language struggles to hold. And then, almost before you have had time to fully settle into that register, it cuts. Suddenly, you are somewhere warm and alive with music. You are in a small Latin American town, flowers everywhere, a wedding being prepared with the kind of communal joy that has nothing to do with military protocols or tactical decisions. The tonal whiplash is intentional and it is effective. It tells you immediately what this film understands and what it is choosing to put at its center. Not the machinery of combat, the thing that combat threatens. The atmosphere in those early wedding scenes is genuinely lovely. There is a likeness to it. The soldiers are loose, laughing out of their armor in every sense. Sutherland's Wright is watchful, always watchful, but there is something in him that seems to be reaching toward the possibility of just being present. Alberto is getting married. This is a moment of joy, and the film lets you feel it. It lets the celebration breathe. The music, the color, the warmth of Isabella and Alberto together. The filmmakers are doing something important here. They are making you invest, making you feel the specific quality of what is about to be taken away. Because when the cartel arrives and the shooting starts, the contrast is not just cinematically effective. It is emotionally devastating in a way that only works because the film took the time to make you care. That contrast, joy shattered by violence, is what hooks me in the first 10 minutes. I walked in expecting a straightforward action chassis. The film gave me something that felt like genuine grief being used as fuel. That is a different kind of film, and I knew by the 20-minute mark that I was going to be paying close attention for the rest of the runtime. The wedding preparation scenes do more than set a tone. They build an architecture of belonging. And that architecture is everything, because without it, the rest of the film is just noise. Look closer at how the squad moves through those early scenes. There is no formal unit structure on display here. No ranks being honored, no tactical precision, no chain of command operating in the background. These men are just men. Wright is whipping someone about dancing. Danny is already at the bar with a kind of cheerful commitment that only soldiers on leave seem to manage. Carson. Ashton Zander's character is quieter, more watchful, taking it all in from a slight remove the way people do when they are not entirely sure they have permission to enjoy themselves fully. Marco is somewhere in between, comfortable in his body, comfortable in the moment. And Alberto, Tommy Martinez's Alberto is radiant. That is not too strong a word. He is radiant with anticipation. He is going to marry Isabella today. The world is soft and bright and real in a way it probably has not felt for him in a long time. This is the moment the film invests everything it will need to spend later. Because here is what most people miss in these early scenes. The film is not just introducing characters. It is establishing what each man is protecting. Wright is protecting his identity as the one who holds them together. Danny is protecting his right to believe that good times are still possible. Carson is protecting something more private, a version of himself that has not yet been entirely consumed by what the uniform demands. Marco is protecting the simple fact of his presence, of still being here to attend a friend's wedding, and Alberto is protecting a future, a specific, beautiful ordinary future that involves Isabella and whatever ordinary life comes after extraordinary service. The cartel does not just interrupt a wedding. It destroys each of those specific things, one by one. Baker's arrival, and I want to be precise here without front-loading the devastation too early, is constructed with a particular kind of economy that speaks to Chadwick's directorial instincts. There is no theatrical build, no villain's monologue announcing the chaos before it begins. The violence arrives the way real violence arrives, without warning, without narrative courtesy, without giving you a moment to brace. Omar Chaparro as Baker is not playing a Bond villain. He is playing something more frightening, a man who has long since stopped needing to justify himself. Baker does not explain his power, he exercises it. And that restraint in the performance is genuinely chilling because it refuses to give you the distance that a more theatrical villain performance would provide. Alberto's death, and I'm staying deliberately measured in how I describe this, lands with a weight that the film earns precisely because of those early scenes. It is not a slow operatic scream death. It is sudden. It is irreversible. And it does something to the squad that the rest of the film spends its entire runtime examining. It transforms their grief into something they do not yet know how to name. Is it rage? Is it duty? Is it love refusing to accept that it has nowhere left to go? The answer, it turns out, is all three at once. And Wright is the one who has to hold that complexity together while also making tactical decisions that will determine who else survives. Let us walk properly through the story now, from the ground up. The film establishes early that Wright's squad has just come off an extended deployment in Syria, weeks of high-intensity operations in a theater of conflict that is never over-explained and does not need to be. What matters is the residue it leaves. These men are simultaneously exhausted and wired. The leave they have been granted is not just time off. It is a kind of psychological necessity, a forced interruption of the combat state before it becomes the only state they know. Alberto's wedding is the specific occasion, but the emotional function it serves is larger than just celebration. It is a reminder that there is something outside of the operational world, something that still works the way it was supposed to. That understanding is crucial to reading Wright as a character. Kiefer Sutherland does not play this man as heroic in any conventional sense. He plays him as responsible. There is a difference that matters enormously. A hero acts for glory or for an ideal. A responsible man acts because someone has to, and he has accepted that he is the someone. From the very first scene, Wright's eyes are doing the work his face does not announce. He is always scanning, always calculating. Even at the bar, even laughing, part of him never fully leaves the operational mode. And you could read that as limitation, as a man who cannot truly rest. But Sutherland plays it as love, as the specific form that care takes in a person who has been taught to express it through vigilance rather than tenderness. It is a quiet internal performance, and it is the backbone of everything. When the Carter's attack begins, Wright does not hesitate. Not because he is fearless. The film is careful about this, but because hesitation has a cost he has been trained to calculate. The immediate priority is accounting for his people. Who is down? Who can move? Who needs to be moved? And then, here is the choice that defines the entire second and third act. Who among the civilians surrounding them can be brought inside the perimeter of protection? Because Wright does not just retreat with his squad. He holds ground. He organizes resistance. He pulls the terrified townspeople, Isabella, Elena, Matteo, Hector, and others, into something that functions like a defensive community. This is where the Magnificent Seven comparison that several reviewers have noted becomes genuinely interesting to examine. The structure is there, trained fighters, an outgone civilian community, a ruthless criminal force with superior numbers and resources. But Brothers Under Fire departs from that template in a way that matters. In the classic version of that story, the heroes arrive from outside and bring salvation as a gift. Here, the soldiers are already present. They were already inside the community, already celebrating, already emotionally embedded before the violence begins. Their defense of the town is not altruistic intervention, it is personal. It is inseparable from what happened to Alberto and what is still happening to Isabella and what Baker has been doing to these farms and these families for far longer than one wedding afternoon. That distinction changes the moral weight of everything that follows. The middle section of the film is where Chadwick's spatial intelligence really operates. He uses the village geography with a specificity that rewards attention. You learn the layout through the action. The market square, the narrow connecting alleys, the elevated positions around the church, the choke points that the cartel will try to exploit and that Wright will try to exploit. The soldiers and the townspeople do not have superior firepower. What they have is knowledge of the space and the tactical discipline to use that knowledge systematically. And watching Wright walk Carson and Danny and Marco through the construction of a defensive network, using local materials, local geography, local people as both protected civilians and informed guides, is one of the film's genuinely satisfying sequences. It is competence as character revelation. You understand these men more deeply from watching them walk together under pressure than you could from any amount of dialogue. Carson's arc over this section of the film is one of the things I want to spend some time on, because Ashton Sanders does something in this role that deserves more attention than it has received. Carson is a soldier in the most immediate sense. He has the training, the physical readiness, the reflexes. But Sanders plays him as someone carrying a specific kind of inner friction that the film does not over-explain. He is younger than the others in some way that is not primarily about age. There is a part of him that has not yet made peace with what this life costs. And as the siege develops and the choices become harder, as the violence becomes less about military protocol and more about something raw and less governed, you watch Carson navigate that internal terrain in real time. There is a scene, and I want to hold the full specifics for the spoiler section, where he is given a choice that requires him to set aside the version of himself that still asks whether something is right and simply act. What Sanders does in that moment with his face, before a single word is spoken, is the kind of acting that elevates a genre film into something you carry home with you. Isabella. Laura Osmer's performance operates on a very different register and is equally essential. In a less considered film, the fiancé of the dead man would be a passive figure, a symbol of loss rather than an active presence. Osmer refuses that. Isabella is not processing her grief in the background. She is present. She is making decisions. She has knowledge of the town and the people and the history of Baker's operations that the soldiers do not have, and she shares it without being turned into an exposition delivery device. There is a quality of controlled devastation in Osma's performance that feels completely authentic. A woman who has had her world destroyed and is choosing, consciously and deliberately, to stay standing inside the wreckage. The film is smart enough to recognize that her emotional intelligence is a tactical resource in a way that purely military thinking cannot account for. Omar Chaparro's Baker is worth examining carefully, because the temptation in this kind of film is to make the villain operatically monstrous, to give them speeches and stylized cruelty that turns them into cinema rather than threat. Chaparro does not do that. Baker is dangerous precisely because he is practical. He is not trying to punish Wright and his squad for some personal reason. He is trying to resolve a problem efficiently. They are in the way. The town is in the way. The path to removing both obstacles is violence applied with business-like consistency. There is one scene, again the full details belong in the spoiler section, where Baker gives an instruction to one of his men and Chaparro delivers it with such flat, administrative certainty that the hairs on your arm stand up without you quite understanding why. It is chilling because it sounds reasonable, and that is the film's most sophisticated observation about the cartel as an institution. It is not built on pathological evil. It is built on normalized violence, on cruelty that has been bureaucratized until it no longer requires justification. The tactical sequences in the film's second half are where cinematographer Toby Elves makes the most visible contribution to the storytelling. The choice to keep the frame tight during the firefights, to stay close to faces and bodies rather than pulling back for wide sweeping action choreography, is a conscious rejection of the spectacle model. You feel the chaos rather than watching it from a safe cinematic distance. There are moments of genuine disorientation where you are not entirely certain who is where, and that uncertainty is a deliberate choice. Combat is disorienting. The filmmakers know this, and they refuse to organize the violence into clean, legible cinema at the expense of truth. When a moment of sudden clarity arrives, a decision made, a position taken, a threat eliminated, it carries weight precisely because the disorder that preceded it was real. The sound design in these sequences is doing serious work alongside the visuals. The sound mix shifts character across the film with a purposefulness that you notice more on a second watch. In the wedding scenes, the audio is warm and layered, Music, voices overlapping, ambient celebration. When the violence begins, the sound world strips back brutally. The music vanishes. The voices become specific tactical commands, fear, pain. And in the spaces between gunfire, there is a particular quality of silence that is not peaceful but held. The specific acoustic texture of people waiting for the next round to break it. It is atmospheric work of a high order. The pacing in the midsection is something I want to address honestly because this is where the film's seams are most visible. Brothers Under Fire has a runtime of just over 100 minutes. Lean for a film with this level of ensemble and this level of stakes. And there are points, particularly in the transition between the initial attack and the organized resistance phase, where the film moves quickly enough that certain emotional beats do not land with the depth they could. The relationship between Wright and one of the townspeople, a character I will name properly in the spoiler section, is sketched in broad strokes when it needed careful detail to fully earn the weight it is later asked to carry. You understand it intellectually, but you do not feel it in your body the way you feel Alberto's loss. That gap is one of the reasons the film sits at a very good 7.3 rather than something higher. The architecture is sound. Some of the interior rooms are underfurnished. There is also a subplot involving Wright's commanding officer, Griff First Colonel Wood, that operates primarily through radio communication and is handled with a briskness that suggests the filmmakers were aware it was necessary but were not entirely sure what to do with it, beyond necessity. The institutional dimension of the story, the question of whether the military chain of command will acknowledge what is happening, and whether that acknowledgement will arrive in time to matter, is a legitimate and interesting question. But the film does not fully commit to exploring it. It raises the question, leaves it partially answered, and moves on. In a film this lean, that choice is defensible. But there is a version of Brothers Under Fire where that thread is woven more tightly into the central emotional fabric, and it would have been a richer film for it. Now let me stay with what the film does brilliantly, because there is genuine craft here that deserves its full due. Sutherland's performance is the spine of the entire enterprise, and it holds with absolute consistency. The moment I want to point to, the one specific scene that proves what he is doing here, is not one of the action sequences. It is a quiet scene in the interior of a building with several of his men around him and the sound of Baker's forces regrouping in the near distance outside. He does not speak for almost a full minute. He is thinking tactically, yes, but also something else. You can see the weight of Alberto's death still present in him, not expressed but carried. The way a man carries something he does not have time to put down, and then he speaks, calmly, clearly, with the specific authority of someone who has decided that whatever he is feeling will not be the deciding factor in what comes next. It is a masterclass in what screen acting can do when it trusts silence. And it is the scene that tells you this film has genuine intentions beyond its genre framework. The story construction deserves recognition for one specific decision that separates it from lesser versions of this material. The film does not simplify the moral arithmetic. Wright and his squad are American military personnel operating in a foreign country without official sanction in defense of civilians against criminal forces that the local authorities are either unable or unwilling to confront. That situation is not morally clean, and the film knows it. There are moments where the soldiers' actions produce collateral consequences that the script does not look away from. The townspeople are not passive beneficiaries. They have agency, they have their own history with the cartel that predates this crisis, and they have perspectives on what is happening that the soldiers cannot fully access. Isabella is the film's primary vehicle for this complexity, and Laura Osma delivers it with a precision that enriches every scene she's in. Visually, the film does something I found genuinely striking with light. The early celebration scenes are shot in warm, generous golden light, the kind that makes everything feel worthy of being remembered. As Baker's forces close in and the siege takes hold, the light becomes harsher, more directional, more unforgiving. There is no softness left in the frame, and in the film's most intense sequences, there are moments of near darkness punctuated by hard bursts of light from gunfire or explosions. a visual vocabulary that tells you exactly where you are emotionally without saying a word. Toby L. West understands that the camera's relationship to light is the camera's relationship to hope, and he manages that relationship with real intelligence throughout. The score, which I have seen attributed to a composer working in the tradition of lean, functional genre scoring rather than swelling thematic orchestration, makes an unusual choice that pays off. It does not try to tell you how to feel during the action sequences. It largely gets out of the way and lets the sound design carry the weight. Where it does assert itself is in the film's quieter, more intimate moments. A melodic thread that recurs in connection with Alberto and the wedding, and that appears, transformed and fractured, in the aftermath of the attack. The structural use of that musical motif, joy remembered, then mourned, then channeled, is one of the film's most emotionally intelligent decisions, and one that most viewers will feel without consciously identifying. The one scene in Brothers Under Fire that I would call completely unforgettable, and I will keep the full contextual details for the spoiler section, involves Wright and Isabella together in the aftermath of a specific tactical engagement. They are not having a conversation about strategy. They are not consoling each other in any formal sense. What they are doing is standing together inside the same grief, looking at the same specific thing and not pretending that either of them has a language for what this moment is. It is 40 seconds of screen time, maybe less, and it contains more human truth than some films manage across their entire runtime. It was because both performers are fully present, fully committed, and the director has the restraint to simply hold the frame and let it happen. That scene is the reason the film stays with you after it ends. Now, where does it fall short? Because it does fall short in specific ways that are worth naming honestly. The most significant structural issue is the underdevelopment of Danny and Marco as individual characters. Solly McLeod and Lea DeCao are both capable performers, and there are individual moments where they register strongly. But the film does not give them distinct emotional arcs the way it gives Carson One. They function primarily as capable ensemble members rather than as fully realized people whose specific fears and loyalties we come to understand. This matters because the film's central argument about the cost of caring, about what brotherhood really means when it is tested by genuine catastrophe, would be more powerful if every member of the squad's individuality were as legible as Wright's and Carson's. When one of them is in danger in the third act, you feel it as general tension rather than specific dread. And the difference between those two things is the difference between a good film and a great one. The second specific issue is a logic problem in the middle of the second act involving the group's access to a particular resource that I will be precise about in the spoiler section. Suffice to say here that there is a moment where the film asks you to accept something about the tactical situation that does not fully hold up under scrutiny. It is not a fatal problem. The film moves quickly enough past it that most viewers will not register the inconsistency in the moment. But on reflection, it is the kind of thing that slightly diminishes the credibility of the very competence the film has been carefully establishing. When a story is asking you to believe in the military precision of its protagonists, it cannot afford to be imprecise about the details that precision depends on. Third, and this is the criticism I feel most strongly about, the cartel as an institution is somewhat under-examined. Baker is a compelling individual antagonist and Chaparro plays him brilliantly. But the film stops short of asking the larger questions that the setting and the scenario genuinely invite. How did Baker's operation come to dominate this town? What relationships, economic, political, social, allow a criminal organization to take over an entire agricultural region? The film gestures toward this through Isabella and through the local characters, but it does not push through to the insight that would give the violence its fullest meaning. Sicario. And the comparison has been made by several critics in the film's reception. Understood that the horror of cartel violence is not in the individual acts but in the systemic conditions that make those acts possible and routine. Brothers Under Fire does not go that deep. It is not trying to be Sicario, and it should not be held to that standard. But it is set in a space where those questions are unavoidable, and the decision to largely sidestep them in favor of the more intimate personal story is a choice that comes with a cost. There are also one or two exchanges of dialogue in the early to middle section of the film where the characters state their emotional situations a little too plainly, where the script tells you what the performance should be showing you. These moments are brief and they do not seriously damage the overall fabric of the film, but they are noticeable as the places where the writing is working harder than the filmmaking needs it to, and the slight tonal inconsistency is a reminder of what genre filmmaking looks like when it briefly loses confidence in its own visual storytelling. Finally, the ending, and I will not detail it here, but I will speak to its structural implications, makes a choice that is genuinely interesting and genuinely controversial. Some viewers will feel it is the most honest conclusion the film could have reached. Others will feel it is an evasion dressed up as ambiguity. I have thoughts about which interpretation is correct, and I will share them in full when we get to the spoiler breakdown. What I will say here is that the ending's power is inseparable from its incompleteness, and whether you accept that trait is the central question of whether this film fully satisfies you. But here is what matters at this stage of our breakdown. Brothers Under Fire is a film that has earned a genuine conversation. It is built on a real emotional foundation, executed with considerable craft in its best sequences, and carried throughout by a lead performance that is among Sutherland's best work in years. Its flaws are real, but they are the flaws of ambition that could not quite reach its full stretch, and I will always take that over competent mediocrity that asks for nothing. And this is the moment the box opens completely. So let us step back now and look at the world this film walked into, because a film does not exist in a vacuum. It arrives somewhere specific, into a particular cultural moment, a particular conversation, a particular set of anxieties and hungers that shape how it is received. And Brothers Under Fire arrived in April of 2026 carrying a set of meanings that the filmmakers may or may not have fully anticipated. Think about what that moment actually looked like. That genre and RAT 2026 was sitting in a genuinely complicated place. On one hand, franchise spectacle had reached a kind of market saturation point where audiences were beginning to openly articulate fatigue, not with action as a form but with action as a delivery mechanism for mythology maintenance. The biggest films in the world were continuations, expansions, spin-offs from universes that had been running so long their internal logic had become a kind of specialized knowledge. To enjoy them fully, you needed to have done homework. And a significant portion of the film-going audience, particularly the portion that goes to the cinema not as a ritual of fandom but as an act of curiosity, was hungry for something that did not require a decoder ring, something that simply told a story about people in a recognizable world with stakes that did not depend on cosmic mythology. That hunger was real, and it created an opening for films exactly like Brothers Under Fire. Films that could say, here is a place, here are people, here is a thing that is happening to them, and here is why it matters. No multiverse, no post-credits teaser setting up the next installment in a brand, just the specific weight of this situation and these individuals inside it. At the same time, the gutter thriller as a genre had been going through its own evolution in the years leading up to this film's release. Sicario, which came out over a decade earlier, had permanently raised the bar for what serious engagement with the American relationship to Mexican cartel violence could look like in cinematic form. Taylor Sheridan's Yellowstone universe and its offshoots, including the Lioness series that one Rotten Tomatoes reviewer actually referenced in connection with Brothers Under Fire, had demonstrated that audiences had a genuine, sustained appetite for stories about American military and intelligence operatives operating in morally complex territory. The question was not whether there was an audience for this kind of material. The question was whether Brothers Under Fire had something new to say within that conversation, or whether it was simply occupying familiar space with familiar competence. The critical reception, such as it was, given that the film launched with a limited theatrical footprint and simultaneously onto digital platforms, reflected that ambiguity. Reviews that engaged with the film seriously noted its central strength, the Sutherland performance, and the genuine emotional foundation built around Alberto's death. But they also noted what they saw as the film's unwillingness to push past genre convention into something more genuinely revelatory. One review, and I'm paraphrasing the spirit rather than the specific words. Observe that while Sicario understood that the US military versus drug cartel premise was a fundamentally political subject, Brothers Under Fire chose to treat it primarily as a personal one. And whether that constitutes a failure of nerve or simply a different set of artistic priorities is a question where reasonable people can genuinely disagree. What is striking is the divergence between that critical hesitation and the audience response, which skewed considerably warmer. The Rotten Tomatoes audience scores told a story that the critical establishment was not entirely telling. Regular viewers, the people who watch these films on Friday nights without necessarily situating them within broader genre discourse, responded to Brothers Under Fire with a degree of genuine affection that speaks to something the more skeptical takes missed. They felt the brotherhood, they felt the grief. They bought Sutherland as this specific kind of man and they rooted for him with the particular urgency that a genuinely invested audience gives to a protagonist they believe in. One viewer comment that circulated, and I want to paraphrase it because it captures something real, described the film as feeling like a television season compressed into 100 minutes, which was simultaneously a limitation and a kind of compliment. The world felt real enough that they wanted more of it. That observation about the television format is more interesting than it might initially appear. We are living in a moment where the long-form character study has largely migrated to streaming television. The constraints of a feature film, the need to establish, develop, and resolve a complete emotional arc within 2 hours, press hard against the kind of patient, layered ensemble development that this particular story seems to want. Brothers Under Fire has the bones of a prestige limited series. The soldiers, the townspeople, the cartel structure, the political and institutional dimensions that the film only gestures toward, all of that material could sustain 6 to 8 hours of genuinely compelling storytelling. The choice to compress it to 100 minutes is not wrong, but it explains some of the film's structural thinness. It is not that the material is not there. It is that there was not enough screen time to excavate it fully. The film's simultaneous theatrical and digital release strategy is itself a telling detail about where it sat in the contemporary distribution landscape. Vertical Entertainment, the distributor, specializes in precisely this kind of mid-budget genre film with legitimate talent attached. The strategy acknowledges reality directly. This film was never going to open on 3,000 screens against franchise competition and win, but it does not need to win that game. It needs to find its audience, and the simultaneous digital release ensures that the audience does not have to seek it out. It arrives at people's doors. And in a streaming environment where the algorithm surfaces content based on viewing history, a Kiefer Sutherland action film with a military survival premise will find its way to exactly the people who will appreciate what it is doing. The awards conversation around Brothers Under Fire was essentially non-existent at the time of writing, which is both understandable and slightly frustrating. Genre films with genuine craft and genuine performances are chronically under-recognized by awards bodies that have traditionally privileged drama over what is sometimes dismissively called entertainment. Sutherland's performance in particular contained internal, precise, doing enormous emotional work to minimal external expression, is the kind of work that gets celebrated effusively when it appears in a film about a poet or a historical figure, and largely passed over when it appears in a film about a soldier fighting a cartel. That disparity says something about awards culture that is worth naming, even if it cannot be changed by naming it. What the film does have is a genuine second-wave discovery arc that was already visible in the weeks following its release. The digital availability and the low barrier to entry meant that word of mouth was beginning to build through social media channels in a way that limited theatrical releases often cannot generate. The algorithm was working for it. Viewers who had gone in with modest expectations and come out surprised were sharing that surprise. And that specific experience, the film that was better than you expected, is one of the most powerful generators of organic recommendation in the current media environment. People do not evangelize films they loved as much as they evangelize films that surprise them, and Brothers Under Fire is, fundamentally, a film of surprises. Whether it feels timeless or perfectly of its era is a genuinely interesting question. Some elements of it are very specifically of this moment: the simultaneous release strategy, the mid-budget positioning, the choice of Colombia as a stand-in location reflecting the practical economics of international production. The way the cartel threat is framed, neither demonized in a cartoonish way nor contextualized within a sophisticated political analysis, but rather treated as a brutal environmental fact that the characters must navigate, feels contemporary in a specific way that a film made 10 years ago would not quite replicate. At the same time, the core of the story, the question of what happens when the people you have chosen to protect are suddenly in the line of fire and what you will sacrifice to keep them, is as old as story itself. That core does not age. It does not belong to a particular cultural moment. It belongs to the part of human experience that has not changed since the first person looked at someone they loved and understood for the first time what they were willing to lose. That is the bridge into what this film is genuinely about. Because underneath the tactical sequences and the gunfire and the cartel machinery, Brothers Under Fire is a film about a very specific kind of loneliness. Let me open this up carefully because it is worth getting right. Captain Jordan Wright is a man who has organized his entire life around other people. His identity is inseparable from his function, from being the one who leads, who holds, who decides, who brings people home. In a different kind of film, that would simply make him a hero. But this film is interested in the cost of that structure. Because a person whose self is entirely organized around keeping others safe has, in a very real sense, made themselves dependent on the presence of people who need to be kept safe. Take away the mission, take away the squad, the deployment, the operational structure, and who is right? The answer the film quietly offers in those early wedding scenes is a man who does not quite know how to exist outside of his function. He is present at the celebration, but he is also observing it from a slight distance. The way you observe something you are not entirely sure you belong inside. Alberta's death does something to Wright that is not primarily about grief in the conventional sense. It is about the collapse of a specific comfort, the comfort of believing that vigilance is enough. That if you are attentive enough, prepared enough, committed enough to the protection of the people you love, you can hold the perimeter. Alberto was his medic, the man who keeps people alive when the worst happens. And the worst happened on a day of celebration in a civilian space, in a context where Wright's professional vigilance had no jurisdiction. The cartel did not breach a military operation. It did not find a weakness in a tactical deployment. It simply arrived at a wedding and shot the groom. And there was nothing Wright's training could have done to prevent it. That helplessness, the gap between readiness and outcome, is the film's deepest wound. And everything that follows is Wright's attempt to recover control not just of the tactical situation, but of the intolerable feeling that care is not enough. That you can organize your entire being around protection and still lose someone in a moment of ordinary joy. Here is where the story connects to something you may recognize from your own experience, not from military service necessarily, from any experience of loss that arrived without warning in a context where you thought you were safe. There is a particular quality to that kind of grief. It does not just mourn the person who is gone, it mourns your own sense of efficacy. It means you distrust the moments of peace because now you know, in your body and not just theoretically, that peace is not a guarantee, that the world will not wait for you to be ready. That joy and catastrophe can coexist in the same afternoon. Wright's response to Alberto's death is not to process that distrust, it is to channel it. The siege of the town becomes not just a survival operation but a kind of referendum on that question. Does vigilance matter? Does preparation matter? Does the act of caring, of organizing yourself around protection, actually change what happens? The film answers yes, imperfectly, with complications and losses along the way. But yes. And that yes is not a simple comfort. It is a hard-won, costly, incomplete answer, which is the only honest kind. The relationship between Wright and the local community, particularly Isabella, but also Elena and Mateo and the other townspeople who choose to stay and fight rather than flee, adds another dimension to this core theme that I find particularly resonant. Wright cannot save these people the way he would save a soldier. He cannot order them. He cannot structure their courage through the mechanisms of military discipline. He can only offer his knowledge and his presence and ask for their trust. And what he receives in return is something that his operational world has not prepared him to understand. The courage of people who have no training, no protocol, no chain of command, who are simply unwilling to let Baker take one more thing from them that belongs to them: their town, their dignity, their right to have had a wedding. That exchange of resources, military competence offered freely to a civilian community that responds with a different kind of strength that the soldiers cannot generate on their own, is the film's most quietly radical suggestion. It says that safety is not delivered by the militarily capable to the militarily helpless. It is co-created between people who have different things to bring to the same problem. And in a genre that very frequently imagines safety as something that trained professionals provide to passive civilians, that is actually a meaningful departure. Carson's arc runs parallel to Wright's central journey in a way that deepens both. If Wright is a man who has organized himself entirely around protection as a form of love, Carson is a younger man who has not yet fully made that commitment, who is still in the process of deciding whether the cost is one he is willing to pay. His internal tension throughout the siege is not primarily about survival. It is about identity, about whether he is going to become the kind of man who stays and absorbs the cost, or whether the part of him that is still asking questions is going to find a way to survive by stepping back from full commitment. The answer the film gives him is hard and beautiful in equal measure, and it connects to the larger question about what brotherhood actually means. Not blood, not contract, not shared uniform or shared mission. Brotherhood, as this film understands and argues it, is the choice to place yourself inside someone else's survival as if it were your own, to make their loss your loss and their protection your purpose, not because you are ordered to, not because the rules require it, but because the alternative, the life of someone who stepped back when the moment came, is a life you cannot accept living. That is not a small thing to say. That is, in fact, the kind of thing that only the best genre films manage to say at all. Because genre provides the conditions, the pressure, the extremity, the irreversibility of the choices that allow the argument to be tested at its hardest point. You cannot know what you would do in a comfortable situation. You can only know what you would do when the cost is real and the outcome is uncertain, and the person next to you is looking at you for something they cannot name but can feel the presence or absence of instantly. Brothers Under Fire, at its best, is about the presence of that something. The film calls it brotherhood. You might call it love that has been tested until it knows its own strength. Alright? Full spoilers from this point. If you have not seen the film yet, close this now, go watch it, and come back when you are ready. Trust me, you will want to experience it fresh, still here. Good. Let us go all the way in. The film's opening sequence in Syria is more carefully constructed than it initially appears. What Justin Chadwick is doing in those first few minutes is establishing a very specific visual and psychological grammar that he will deliberately disrupt the moment the film cuts to Mexico. In Syria, the frame is controlled. The light is harsh but legible. The danger is organized. It comes from specific directions, is engaged with specific protocols, and is managed through the mechanisms of military competence. Reid operates in that environment with an ease that is not arrogance but mastery. He knows the rules of this world. He knows his role within it. And Sutherland plays that mastery through an economy of movement, no wasted gestures, no performative command presence. Just a man who is exactly where he is supposed to be, doing exactly what he has trained to do. The cut to Mexico, to the burst of color and music and the overwhelming normalcy of wedding preparation, is not just a tonal shift, it is a structural argument. Chadwick is saying this is the other half of the equation. This is what all of that competence and sacrifice is for. This is the world that the operational world is supposed to be protecting. And the implicit question in that cut is whether the man who is so precisely equipped for one of these worlds can find a way to be genuinely present in the other. The answer, as the early scenes make clear, is that he is trying. Wright is genuinely trying to be there for Alberto, for the squad, for the rare, ordinary joy of a day that has nothing to do with mission objectives. But Sutherland plays the effort itself as visible. He is not naturally at rest. The watchfulness is always just beneath the surface, and there are moments where you can see him consciously pulling it back, choosing to engage rather than observe. It is a beautiful, subtle piece of character work, and it pays off massively when everything goes wrong. Alberto and Isabella's relationship, the thing at the center of the celebration, is drawn with real warmth in the brief time the film gives it. What Tami Martinez accomplishes in his scenes is genuinely moving in retrospect. He plays Alberto as a man who has reconciled what he has seen and done with who he wants to be. He does not carry the same visible weight that Wright carries. He has found a way through Isabella, through the specific joy of this day, through the ordinary future that the wedding represents. And that makes his death not just a loss of a person, but a loss of the possibility he embodied. The possibility that you can come through the hard things and arrive intact on the other side. When Baker's forces attack, the film's sound design does something that I want to draw your attention to specifically because it is one of the most intelligent choices in the entire film. The music of the wedding does not cut abruptly. It fades, but not immediately. For a few seconds that feel much longer, you have the celebratory music playing underneath the first sounds of violence. The two sonic worlds occupying the same space before the celebration is finally extinguished entirely. That overlap is not an accident. It is the film telling you at a subauditory level what is being destroyed, not just lives. The specific frequency of joy. Alberto is shot before he can understand what is happening. The film does not slow down for this. It does not give you the slow-motion operatic death sequence that so many action films deploy to signal importance. He is alive and laughing, and then he is not. The violence is that quick, that indifferent, that final. And what Sutherland does in the immediate aftermath, the second Wright processes what he has just seen, is one of the greatest pieces of acting in the film. The grief is there, completely, but it is immediately, almost violently, organized into response. His face does not give way to the grief. Instead, you watch him contain it, put it somewhere internal that he can reach later if he survives, and shift entirely into operational mode. Not because he does not feel it. Because feeling it right now will get more people killed. That containment, that choice to defer grief in service of action is both heroic and quietly devastating. Because you understand that the cost of it will be paid eventually. The grief does not go away. It waits. And part of what the film's ending is about is the moment when that deferred reckoning arrives. Isabella's response to Alberto's death operates on an entirely different emotional register, and that contrast is one of the film's structural masterstrokes. Where Wright contains Isabella breaks and then rebuilds, she cannot defer the grief because she has no operational mode to retreat into. She has to carry it in the open while also making survival decisions. Where to shelter, who she can trust among the townspeople, what she knows about Baker's operation that might be useful. Laura Osma plays the scene of her discovery of Alberto's death with an absence of theatrical performance that is almost unbearably real. There are no composed lines of dialogue, no stoic acceptance, just the ragged, physical reality of someone whose world has just ended, trying to keep breathing inside the wreckage of it. The scene that the two of them, Wright and Isabella, share in the immediate aftermath of the attack, before the tactical situation has fully clarified, is the emotional core of the entire film. They are in a side room, having been shepherded there by Carson during the initial chaos. Outside, the sounds of Baker's forces moving through the town. Inside, these two people who have both just lost the same person in entirely different ways. Wright begins almost reflexively to organize, to assess the space, identify the exits, think tactically. And Isabella stops him, not with words. She simply puts her hand on his arm and holds it there, and what that gesture says is, not yet. Not for 1 second. Just 1 second. Not yet. And Wright stops. And in that stillness, you see the grief that he has been containing since the moment the shooting started. Sutherland does not give it a dramatic release. There is no breakdown, but something loosens around his eyes. Something that was locked gets briefly, visibly unlocked. And then it closes again, and he nods, and they move. That exchange, 40 seconds of screen time, no dialogue, two performers doing everything with physicality and presence, is the film's most important scene because it tells you what the rest of the film is about. It is not about Wright saving the town. It is about whether Wright can allow himself to be human, to need and receive rather than just provide, while also doing what has to be done. The answer is yes. Incompletely and with enormous cost. But yes. The tactical middle section of the film is where the screenplay's structural smartness is most visible, and where the Magnificent Seven parallel is simultaneously most apt and most deliberately subverted. The classic structure of that archetype, trained fighters organizing a civilian defense, is present and functioning. But the writers make a choice that changes the moral weight of every tactical decision. They give Baker resources that make the situation genuinely impossible by conventional military logic. He has more men, more firepower, established knowledge of the terrain, and operational backing from a criminal organization that has been running this region for years. The squad cannot win a straight fight. They know this. The film knows this. And so the question is never whether Wright can outgun Baker. The question is whether he can outthink him, and whether the townspeople who have been living under Baker's shadow long enough to know its specific shape can provide the intelligence and the moral clarity that pure tactical thinking cannot. Elena Flora Martinez's character becomes crucial here in a way that the film does not over-announce. She is a local woman who has been watching Baker's operation for years. She knows which families have been compromised, which people in the town are not entirely trustworthy because Baker has leverage over them. She knows the specific geography of Baker's supply routes. She knows where he is most confident because he has never been challenged there. And she brings all of that knowledge to Wright, not as a secondary character handing information to the real protagonist, but as an equal contributor to a collective survival strategy. Her scene with Wright, where she is explaining the layout of Baker's supply depot, and Wright is listening with the specific quality of attention of a man who recognizes superior local knowledge when he encounters it, is one of the film's quietly excellent exchanges. It is the moment where the film's argument about co-created safety becomes most explicit. Wright has the tactical framework. Elena has the specific intelligence. Neither of them can succeed without what the other brings. Mateo Orlando Pineda's character carries a different weight in the story that I want to spend time on because it is one of the film's more complex and underappreciated threads. Mateo has a history with Baker that goes beyond the current crisis. One of the farms that Baker has taken over was Mateo's father's farm. It was taken 2 years before the events of the film through a combination of violence and legal manipulation that left the family with nothing. Mateo stayed in the town, partly because he had nowhere else to go, partly because leaving would have felt like accepting the theft. He has been living for 2 years with a particular kind of rage that has had nowhere to go. The arrival of Wright's squad, the arrival of people with the capacity to actually fight back, does something to that rage. It gives it direction. And it also risks giving it permission to go somewhere it should not go. The scene where Mateo asks Wright to let him go after Baker personally, not as part of the defensive strategy but as his own act of vengeance for what was done to his family, is one of the film's most morally interesting moments. Wright's response is not a lecture on the rules of engagement. It is something more honest and more difficult. It tells Mateo, in essence, that he understands the need, that he is carrying something similar right now, and that the need is real. But that need and strategy are not always pointing in the same direction, and the difference between them is the difference between something that might actually work and something that will definitely get Mateo killed without achieving anything that matters. That conversation, paraphrased here, but landed with real weight by both performers, is the film doing what its best moments do, using the pressure of the survival situation to compress a complex human truth into a small number of words and looks. It is a scene about the difference between justice and revenge, about what it means to honor the dead not by following their loss into catastrophe, but by choosing survival and the possibility of something afterward. Wright is, in this moment, arguing against his own impulse. He wants to do exactly what Mateo wants to do. The difference is that he knows he cannot afford to. Not yet. Maybe not ever. And that self-knowledge, the ability to override the impulse in service of the actual goal, is one of the specific forms of discipline that leadership demands and that the film is examining with real seriousness. Carson's pivotal moment arrives in the second half of the film's third act, in a sequence that is the most kinetically intense in the entire movie, and also, if you are paying the right kind of attention, the most emotionally complex. The squad has managed to draw Baker's main force into a specific position using a combination of Elena's local knowledge and a piece of tactical deception that Wright constructs from materials available in the town. The decoy works. Baker's men commit to a direction of attack that leaves one of their flanks exposed, and the squad's response requires splitting. Wright and Marco holding the main defensive line, while Danny covers the southern approach, and Carson takes a specific position that will either turn the engagement decisively or leave him completely isolated if anything goes wrong. The sequence is shot with a handheld intensity that puts you inside the physical experience of it. Chadwick does not choreograph this like a video game. There is no clean sight line between allies and enemies. There is smoke and noise and the disorienting geography of close urban combat. Carson is in position, waiting for the flanking element to appear, and what the film gives you in that waiting in the seconds before the engagement is something that is really about the decision he made in the conversation with Wright earlier. He chose to stay. He chose to commit fully. And now that choice is being tested in exactly the terms he feared it might be. Ashton Sanders plays the waiting with a physical steadiness that is doing enormous internal work, the breathing visible in his chest, the slight movement of his jaw, the eyes that are absolutely present, not retreating into any internal distance because retreat is no longer an option. He is here, fully, irreversibly here. And when Baker's flanking element appears and Carson moves, fast, precise, without hesitation, you feel it not as action but as identity. This is the moment Carson becomes the man he was deciding whether to be. The training and the choice arriving simultaneously in a single sustained sequence that is simultaneously the most conventional genre moment in the film and its most genuine emotional one. Marco does not survive the engagement. I want to be direct about this because the film is and because the directness matters. Marco, Laird Akio's character, the squad member who was most simply and uncomplicatedly present in the film, the one whose warmth and groundedness were part of what the early celebration scenes felt like, is killed in the southern approach while drawing fire that allows Carson to complete the flanking maneuver. His death is not presented as a sacrifice in the noble, speech-preceded sense. It is a combat casualty, the kind that happens fast and without ceremony, and the film's refusal to give it a score swell or a slow-motion treatment is both painful and honest. This is what the cost looks like, not poetry, not cinema, just the wrong moment, the wrong angle, and the presence of a person replaced by their absence. Wright does not have time to stop for it. The tactical situation is still unresolved. He notes it. There is a single shot of his face when he registers what has happened on the radio, and then he moves. And the grief joins Alberto's grief in the internal compartment that is getting very full by now. Sutherland plays this accumulation with extraordinary physical precision. By the film's final sequences, Wright moves differently than he did at the beginning. He is carrying more than his equipment. You can see it in his shoulders, in the slight change in his gait, in the way his face has learned a new economy of expression that has nothing to do with stoicism and everything to do with the specific weight of accumulated loss. Baker's capture. Because Baker is captured, not killed, in the film's climactic sequence is the choice that has divided audiences most sharply and that I want to spend real time on because it is the film's most consequential artistic decision. The conventional genre architecture demands Baker's death, the villain's end, the catharsis of violence reciprocated. And there is a version of this film where that is what happens, where Wright, with Alberto and Marco dead and Isabella standing in the ruins of her wedding day, delivers the kind of final reckoning that the revenge structure the film has been building seems to promise. Instead, Baker is taken alive. The circumstances involve Isabella directly, a detail I will get to in a moment, but the essential fact is that Wright, given the moment to end it, chooses capture over execution, and the film does not entirely explain why. It does not give Wright a speech about justice or the law or the difference between soldiers and killers. The choice is made and held, and the film moves past it, without wrapping it in moral commentary. And that refusal to explain is simultaneously the film's most mature decision and the thing that frustrated the audiences who wanted catharsis. Here is how I read it. Wright has been, throughout this entire film, in a battle with the impulse to override everything: training, strategy, the goal of keeping people alive, with the pure need to avenge. He has argued Matteo out of it. He has held Carson inside the mission's logic, when Carson's grief over Marco almost pulled him sideways, and in the final moment he holds himself. Not because he does not want to end Baker, but because he has been making at every point in this story the choice to keep the goal larger than the impulse, to be the man who brings them home rather than the man who satisfies the grief. And killing Baker in that moment, particularly with Isabella watching, would be crossing from the first of those identities into the second. It would be Matteo's choice. The choice Wright argued him out of. And Wright, whatever else he is a man who cannot argue something to someone else that he is not willing to practice himself. Isabella's role in Baker's capture is the scene that, on a second watch, reveals the film's deepest layer. It is Isabella who creates the moment of capture. Not through violence. She does not disarm Baker or physically restrain him. She does something more unexpected. She speaks to him, directly, calmly, with the specific authority of someone who has nothing left to lose and has therefore transcended the fear that his power depends on. What she says, paraphrasing as always, is addressed to the part of Baker that still exists within the institutional structure of his operation. She names him, not as a criminal boss, but as a man who made specific choices that brought him to this specific moment, and she tells him with absolute precision what happens next, not as a threat. As in accounting, Baker, facing this, hesitates, and Wright takes him. The power of that moment is not in its action, but in its implication. Isabella does not have military training. She does not have tactical advantage. What she has is the moral clarity of someone who has absorbed the worst thing and is still standing. And that clarity, that refusal to be diminished by the catastrophe into someone smaller than she was before it, is what Baker cannot process. His entire operation is built on the premise that violence produces fear, and fear produces compliance. Isabella stands in front of him with everything he has taken from her and offers him not fear, but reckoning, and the power structure that violence built cannot hold against it. It is a quietly extraordinary scene, and it is the moment where the film earns everything it has been building toward. The ending proper, the final scenes operate in a register of deliberate incompleteness that I find genuinely brave for this genre. Wright and the surviving members of the squad are extracted. Isabella and the townspeople are left with a Baker in custody and a cartel structure that, the film is honest enough to acknowledge, is not going to simply dissolve because its current leader has been taken. Danny is alive and present, Carson is alive and changed, Marco is dead, Alberto is still dead. The institutional situation. The question of whether the US military will acknowledge what happened here, whether Wright will face any consequence for the extra-legal operation he effectively ran, is gestured at but not resolved. The final shot is Wright, outside, with the sky going dark. He is not looking anywhere dramatic. He is not staring off toward a horizon of meaning. He is just standing, breathing, present in a way that he was not entirely in those early wedding scenes. The watchfulness is still there. It will always be there. But underneath it, there is something that was not there before. Not peace, not resolution, something more like the specific weight of having paid the full cost of caring and not turned away from it and survived. That is not a triumphant ending, it is an honest one. And for this particular film, with this particular question at its center, it is the right one. There's no post credit scene. The film ends where it ends, and in that refusal to append a promise of continuation, it makes a statement about its own integrity. This story is complete. What happens next belongs to these people, not to any franchise. The hidden details and foreshadowing that most viewers miss on first watch, and there are several that reward a second viewing significantly. The most elegant piece of foreshadowing is in the wedding ceremony itself, before the attack begins. Alberto is saying something to Isabella, and the film shows us his face impures up as he speaks, but not his exact words. And Isabella laughs, and then her expression shifts into something more serious, more tender, more permanent. You clock it in the moment as a beautiful emotional beat in a wedding scene. On a second watch, knowing what you know, it reads completely differently. That shift in her face is the face of someone who has just been given something they will need to carry with them for a long time. It is the moment the film places inside Isabella the specific weight of that promise, that word, that private thing between them, so that when she stands in front of Baker at the end, she is not standing there alone. She is standing there with that weight in her, and that is what makes her immovable. The second detail is in the sound design during Carson's isolated firefight. At the moment where he makes the decisive move, the moment that crystallizes his identity as the man who commits fully, there is a brief, barely audible musical fragment in the score that is a transformed version of the wedding music from the opening. It is there for maybe 2 seconds. Most viewers will not consciously register it, but it is there. And what it says, to the part of your listening that processes music before your conscious mind does, is that this act, this choice, this moment of full commitment is connected to the thing that started everything, to Alberto, to the wedding, to the specific joy that was destroyed. Carson is not fighting out of rage or strategy in that moment. He is fighting for the thing that was there at the beginning, even though it is gone. He is fighting in some sense for the possibility of a world where joy exists and deserves to be protected. There is also a detail in the set decoration of the final exterior scene, the last shot of right outside, that I want to point to. In the background, partially visible through the dust and the aftermath, there are flowers. The specific flowers, marigolds, deep orange, the kind used in Mexican and Colombian celebrations of the dead, that were visible at the wedding ceremony. They should not logically still be there in that form after everything that has happened to the space. They are not there for logical reasons. They are there for the same reason the wedding music is in Carson's firefight. They are the film insisting in the quietest possible way that what is lost is not gone, that the dead are present, that Alberto is in the frame, in the final image, still there. The host's personal reaction to the ending, and I want to be honest about this, is complicated in a way that took me a day or two to fully sort out. My immediate response was something between admiration and frustration. The frustration was honest. Part of me wanted the catharsis. Part of me wanted Baker to receive the full weight of what he had done. And the film not providing that put me in an uncomfortable position where I had to sit with the discomfort rather than being released from it, which I eventually realized is precisely the point. Wright's choice is meant to be uncomfortable. The film is not asking you to feel good about it. It is asking you to understand it. To recognize, as Wright has recognized, that the difference between justice and revenge is real and matters and costs something to maintain. By the time I had processed all of that, my frustration had converted into something that felt much more like respect. The film trusted its argument enough to follow it to an ending that does not give you everything you wanted. That is not a common thing. That is the specific courage of a film that knows what it is saying and says it without flinching. And that courage is part of why, even with its structural limitations and its underdeveloped threads, Brothers Under Fire stays with you. It does not let you fully leave it. The ending stays open in your mind the way genuinely meaningful things do, not because it failed to close, but because it closed around something real. One final detail from the spoiler territory that I want to share because it is the most purely cinematic thing the film does. In the scene immediately after Baker's capture, before the extraction sequence, there is a brief moment between Wright and Danny, just the two of them sitting against a wall in the aftermath of everything. No dialogue. The camera holds on them from a distance. Both men are breathing, both are alive. The space between them on that wall is the exact width of the space where Alberto would have been sitting. The film does not draw attention to it. No close up on the empty space, no musical cue. The frame simply holds it and lets you find it yourself. And when you find it, and you will on first watch or second, it is the kind of cinematic moment that demonstrates the difference between a film that tells a story and a film that tells a story. It is there, it is real, it is not asking for your notice, it is simply present the way grief is present. Quietly, permanently, in the space between people who are still here. So here we are. The final layer, the verdict. Brothers Under Fire earns a 7.3 out of 10 from me, and I want to explain that number with the precision it deserves, because a number without explanation is just noise. A 7.3 is not a consolation prize, it is not a polite acknowledgement of effort. It is a genuine assessment of a film that does real things well, stumbles in specific ways, and ultimately delivers something more meaningful than its surface packaging suggests. It is the score of a film that surprised me, and in a landscape where surprise is increasingly rare, that counts for something significant. Here is exactly who should watch Brothers Under Fire and why. If you are someone who comes to action films not just for the kinetic release but for the human question underneath the movement, if you have ever watched a film like The Grey or Lone Survivor or Sicario and found yourself thinking about it days later because it said something true about what men carry and what they cost each other, then Brothers Under Fire is absolutely for you. Watch it with your full attention. Give it the first 20 minutes it needs to build what it is building, and it will pay you back with interest. If you are a Kiefer Sutherland fan who has been waiting for a role that gives him something genuinely substantial to work with in this chapter of his career, this is that role. This is not Jack Bauer in a new context. This is a different, quieter, more internally complex performance than anything the 24 comparisons suggest. Sutherland is doing real acting here. The kind that trusts silence and earns its weight through accumulation rather than declaration. This performance deserves to be seen and it deserves to be talked about more than it has been. If you appreciate ensemble filmmaking where the supporting cast is doing genuine work, where the people around the lead are not furniture but full participants in the story, then Laura Ozma and Ashton Sanders alone are worth your time. Ozma in particular is delivering a performance that transcends the material in the best possible way. She takes what could have been a supporting role defined entirely by loss and turns it into the film's moral compass. Sanders takes what could have been a secondary arc and makes it the film's emotional journey. Both of them make Brothers Under Fire richer than it would have been without their specific contributions. If you have been feeling the franchise fatigue, if you are hungry for a film that simply tells a contained story about specific people in a specific situation with a beginning and an end that belongs entirely to itself, then this film is a genuinely satisfying answer to that hunger. It does not set up a sequel. It does not plant seeds for a universe. It tells its story and ends it and trusts that to be enough. In the current landscape, that restraint is almost radical. Now let me be equally honest about who might not connect with this film, because that honesty is part of what makes a real verdict real. If you need your action films to deliver full cathartic release, if the satisfaction of a villain meeting his end is a non-negotiable part of what you are there for, Brothers Under Fire will frustrate you. The ending is deliberately incomplete in the way I describe in the spoiler section, and that incompleteness is a feature, not a bug, but it is a feature that not every viewer will appreciate. If what you want from 90 minutes of military survival tension is a clean, definitive, emotionally resolving conclusion, this film is going to leave you in an uncomfortable in-between space. Some people find that space interesting, others find it unsatisfying. Know which kind of viewer you are before you sit down. if you need your ensemble fully developed, if you require every member of a squad to have a complete legible individual arc, you will notice the gaps. Danny and Marco, as I said in the critical section, are sketched where they should be drawn. Marco's death carries weight because the film has been careful to make him warm and present in the early scenes, but it does not carry the specific, individual, irreplaceable weight that it would if we had been given his particular inner life the way we were given Carson's. That unevenness in the ensemble is real and it is worth knowing about before you go in. And if you come to this expecting the visual and narrative scale of a major studio military film, the helicopter sequences of Lone Survivor, the spatial grandeur of Black Hawk Down, the operatic action architecture of the biggest genre entries, Brothers Under Fire will feel lean to you. It is a mid-budget film working within the honest constraints of what it is. The restraint is often a strength, as I have argued, but there are moments where the scale of the situation the story is describing and the scale of the cinema depicting it do not quite match. That mismatch is something you either accept as part of the film's particular character or you find it diminishing. It depends entirely on what you are calibrated to expect. As for format, how should you watch it? The simultaneous digital and limited theatrical release means most of you will be watching it at home on a streaming or rental platform. And honestly, for this particular film, that is fine. Better than fine, in some ways. Brothers Under Fire is a film that rewards close attention, and close attention is something you can give it more fully in a controlled home environment than in a cinema where ambient distraction is a factor. The intimate emotional moments, the 40-second scene between Wright and Isabella, the final shot of Wright outside, the empty space on the wall between him and Danny, these land with full force on a screen you are close to. They do not require a cinema for their power. They require your presence. That said, if you do have the opportunity to see it in a cinema, if it is still in limited release in your area when you are watching this, the tactical sequences in the second half benefit from theatrical sound. The gunfire, the sound design work I described in the siege sequences, the specific way silence is used between bursts of violence, these things are felt differently through speakers you cannot control than through a sound system you can turn up. If the cinema option is available and accessible, it is worth it for that aspect of the experience specifically. Do not own it yet. Watch it. Decide whether it is the kind of film you will return to, whether it is a once and done, or a film that gives you more on a second visit, and then decide. I think it is the kind of film that rewards a second watch significantly. The foreshadowing I described, the quiet details in the background of the final frame, the musical thread connecting Carson's fire to the wedding, these things earn a second viewing, but that is a personal decision, and I would not tell you to buy without watching first. One final thought before I close the box, and this one I want you to carry with you even if nothing else from this breakdown stays. The question at the center of Brothers Under Fire, what does it cost a soldier to care, is answered by the film at the very end, not in resolution, not in the conventional architecture of dramatic closure. It is answered in that last image. Wright standing outside, still present, still carrying everything. The grief of Alberto and the grief of Marco and the incomplete justice of Baker's capture and the specific loneliness of being the person who holds the perimeter while the world inside the perimeter gets to breathe. He is carrying all of it, and he's standing. And the flowers are in the background, and the sky is going dark, and he is not moving away from any of it. The answer, as it turns out, is everything. It costs everything, and he pays it, and he would pay it again, because the alternative, the life of someone who stepped back from the cost, who chose the self-preservation of not fully caring, is not a life this man is capable of living. That is not heroism as the genre usually imagines it. It is something quieter and more devastating and more true. It is the specific human condition of the people who are constitutionally unable to stop caring, who carry the cost of that inability through every day and every loss, and who stand at the end of their worst days still recognizable as themselves. That is worth 7 3/10 out of 10, easily. And on its best days it reaches for something higher than that. Every film is a box, and we open this one together. Now, before you go, thank you. Genuinely, if you made it to the end of this breakdown, you are exactly the kind of person this channel exists for. The person who does not just want to know what happened, but wants to understand why it matters. That is why the Film Box exists. That is the conversation we are always trying to have here, and having it with you every time is the whole point. If this breakdown gave you something, a new way into the film, a detail you missed, a reason to give it a watch or rewatch, hit the like button. It genuinely helps more people find this channel and find these conversations. And if you are new here and this is the first time you have spent time with the Film Box, subscribe and come back. Everywhere we open gets this level of attention. Everyone. For the comment section this week, I want the real conversation, not just reactions. Here is the question I am leaving you with. Do you think Wright made the right choice at the end? Not the choice the genre structure seemed to be building toward the other one. The one the film actually gave him. Was it strength or was it avoidance? Was it the most honest thing the film could have done? Or did it rob you of something you had earned the right to feel? Tell me where you land on that and tell me why. I will be reading everything. Next time on the Film Box, we are opening a very different kind of box. A film that arrived quietly, built its audience through word of mouth alone, and is now being talked about in ways its makers probably did not anticipate when they were making it. It is a film about time and memory and the specific cruelty of almost. And it is going to give us a lot to work with. I will not name it yet. But if you are subscribed, you will know when it arrives. Every film is a box. And we have only just started opening them. That's the Film Box. See you in the next one.